To first of all be hosted by AA, by the Art Archive. I am Cosmin Kostina, the Executive Director of Parasite, and we're one of the organizers of this event together with Ambassadors of Design, and Jay Henshu and Stephanie Boonhong are here from the Ambassadors of Design. And it's our great pleasure to introduce to Hong Kong audience Manuel Raeder, who is one of the most groundbreaking designers in the field of contemporary art today. And with Manuel, we are engaged in a dialogue research process of rethinking the communication strategy of Parasite, and that will translate in many different changes for our organization, the most visible one of which would be the transformation of our current website into a multi-level instrument for research, communication, and accessibility for many people. But that is still to come, and we will introduce that to Hong Kong and international audience very soon. But tonight we will just hear about Manuel's practice in general, and about his approach to design and art, because he's always working somehow at the border of these two fields, and about his general principles in doing so. And together with his studio, he has designed over 100 artist books over the last decade. He has redesigned and reconceived the communication strategies of many art institutions in the world, like the Kölnischer Kusntverein, the Kunstverein in Munich, Artist Space in New York, among many other things. So without further ado, I would like to invite Manuel to take the microphone.
So thanks first of all, of course, for Cosmin for inviting me, and or Parasite and AA and Ambassadors of Design for making it possible. I thought of giving more kind of a very flexible presentation tonight, which is more related also to things that I like and things that relate to what I do, rather than entirely only showing my own work. So you will see things which are not necessarily even done by me, but I would like to show them also, so you have a little bit of a background maybe of how I work and how my studio works and what I do. But this is like, for example, a book by a German London living editor called Haegue Yang, and it's really one of the first books which is an example of a group show catalog that goes beyond purely documenting works in an exhibition. It's from 1969, and it was an exhibition with the artists Daniel Spurri, Dieter Roth, Emmett Williams, Andre Tompkins, and friends. So, and the show was called Friends and Friends. So what they basically did is that they invited their friends. There were a bunch of friends who were all connected together. Most of them were associated with the movement, with the art movement Fluxus as well. And so they decided to make this exhibition after also Daniel Spurri had a restaurant, and then they decided to make this show with the catalog being an extension of the exhibition. So the book in itself served as a parallel to the show. So there's no works in the catalog which are directly documented. So what they did is they did questionnaires to each other, or they made specific pages which were designed specifically for the book. And at the time, 69, if you start looking into art catalogs or documentation exhibitions, this was very unusual, because it was really a groundbreaking publication, if you ask me. First of all, I love most of the work, of course, that Haegue Yang did. You might know it from books that he's done with Emmett Williams, Dieter Roth, Richard Hamilton. He's published most of their artist books. And so here, for example, most of them, there are even jokes between them, or jokes that are related to other friends. And Dieter Roth then gives an interview to Daniel Spurri, and Daniel Spurri an interview to Dieter Roth. So it's all quite humorous, the book. And it's kind of really a parallel thing to what was in the show. And the reason why I show this to you is because a lot of the books that I've made in the last 10 or 11 years are most of them function much more like this. Most of the books are parallels to an artwork, or they are parallel to a discourse or to an exhibition. I never really made, well, I made one monograph, but that was kind of good. Sorry a bit about the partially amateurish iPhone presentation, but this is a work by Mariana that some of you know, Mariana Castillo Deball, a Mexican artist that's lived in Europe already for quite a long time. And she made a piece in 2001 that I still very much love. It's called The Wall in the Books. And but it's basically based on the text by Borges, which is based on the former Chinese emperor that basically burned all the books in order to introduce Chinese language. And Borges wrote a short story about it, which was called The Wall in the Books. So she made an artwork in relation to this text by Borges, which was to go to the library in the Jan van Eyck Academy and erase all these words which are part of this text from the public library. So she took each word from the text. So what you can see on the roll here is basically the trace of the artwork. So here you can see, so this is the indexing numbers and the word in which book you would find it. And in that book she would erase one word. So the artwork in itself was the only documentation that exists, is of course on this piece of roll or scroll. And of course this is a piece of work which is very much also comment on how to justify history, you know, and how, like for example, this emperor erased all the books that were before him in order to put himself into place. You know? So, and of course, art, in that sense, or artist books have a very strong relation to this, because it is about documenting work and it is about history in that sense, or how you write it and how you perceive it and how you deal with it. So she made an installation which was the negative space of the Jan van Eyck Library, and that's in the gallery space. And that was last year at the Royal College of Art. They redid the whole piece in the Royal College of Art Library. So it was the same text, and then these are copies from all the pages in the book of the library where she erased the one word from the book. So this is the documentation how she's doing it now. It's a large book. The word is always cut out from that page and photocopied. And if you go to the library and you take out the book, that word will be missing, or it will be scraped out or erased. Then I thought to briefly show you. I will just show you the very beginning of an artist called Omar, of a very early piece of work by an artist called Omar Fast, that some of you might also know already his work, but this is a very early piece.
I want to tell you something.
Come closer.
Don't be
Upset?
and don't get emotional. Just get near me and pay attention.
Please. Look, I know
That you're scared. I know what you're afraid of. You mistrust your body. Lately, it has been looking more and more foreign. It's been doing strange
things.
You suspect that it has been keeping something from you. That knowledge of your own death is already programmed inside it somehow. That it's stored in a primitive
Organ
that in between the crush
of blood
and digestion, your appendix or spleen
sits obliviously
still like an overgrown
traffic
island keeping watch over a terrible
secret.
You worry that this knowledge will arrive
At
your very last moment, not as a
Spiritual revelation accompanied by an overwhelming cascade of sensations.
but as a very public and vulgar
Betrayal. You're afraid of dying alone.
But you're even more terrified of dying in public. It's not
Happening
at this very moment. Perhaps not as long as you listen and watch. People don't die in front of their televisions. In the meantime, we could
Anyway, you
probably
get
do
an idea.
something.
The main reason why I wanted to show it to you, so you understand a little bit of how, for example, this artist works and what his work is about. The piece continues, of course, much longer, but it's very much about deconstruction of language and also how language is used, or how he uses in video art. So he became very much more established in using video and language in combination in film works. And we worked, for one example, we worked on a book together. At a very early stage, it was another video piece, which was Broadwell. And it's a theme park in the US where basically they are all reenacting the Civil War, and basically they're in the costumes, running around, shoving powder in the guns, baking bread. It's like a Disneyland, but everyone is dressed like this. And he made an interview with the people who work there in character and out of character, and then wrote his own text and collaged it together, like the chop up, like you just saw in the video before. So the actors were articulating actually his text. And the piece very much deals, of course, with questions of the US and the Civil War and an overlap of September the 11th. So while he was still editing the piece, we started working on a book together, which you can see here, and the books functioned as a parallel to the work. So the book is the only document where you could trace the original interviews back to what the people actually said. So what you see in the interviews, parallel lines where you can see from which sentences constructed all the texts for the video work. And in that way also the book has a total side function to the video work. It's not like, in that sense, documenting it directly. It's an extension of it. Yes, so we can see parts of it here, but and we made also a typeface together for it, which was basically based on clashing a serif font from an 18th century serif font and a non-serif modernist typeface, and putting it through a program and all the errors that happened and leaving them, and that was then used for the layout. And so with him I made already several books now, and of course after a while you have a complete different dialogue also with artists. And that also happened at one point to me with a fashion label called Bless, that is based in Berlin and Paris, and they asked me at one point to start thinking about a book for 10 years of their work. And Bless really works on the edge of art and fashion, and they have always been very concerned also with how their clothes is positioned, or what their clothing, like for example, they think that the piece of clothing should actually show more the brain than the body. So it's more the person that's wearing it and their personality than, let's say, adopt to a cliche that is conducted by the fashion industry. So for every 6 months they do shows in Paris for the défilés, and usually they don't do classical catwalks, they do other events where, for example, friends are sitting in a room and they're having dinner and they're wearing the clothes, and then the press can enter and they can look at the people eating, or things like this. So I'll show you briefly like one movie, one documentation of one of the recent défilés. basically what it is, they made a machine which the idea is it's called a workout computer. It's like a computer, but it's a machine that you at the same time exercise on. So if you type a word, you have to hit one of those. So it's kind of an irony also, people sitting all day in front of the computer and not doing exercise anymore. And so the presentation was basically this: people could go and type their own sentences, and then they would anyway, so after this, like how this industry works is that these collections are then of course documented, and then they produce something that's called a lookbook every 6 months, which is basically documentation of the new collection. And the same attitude when we started working together of how they think about the défilés and their label itself, we started discussing about new ways how we could deal with that in a publication format, and deal also with different ways of escaping out of the fashion industry and use distribution in a different way. So what we started doing is we started teaming up with existing magazines. So for example, this is a Korean magazine called Buell, which is more around music. And this is one example of many that we've done in the last 10 years, where we team up with a magazine and we basically can convince them to publish the lookbook inside their magazine. And what we did here, I could convince them to publish the lookbook on every page on the bottom. So they made the layout of the magazine, and then at the end we just dropped our images on the bottom, and it was running all the way through. And that way we enter also an escape from this regular form of distribution within just the fashion industry, which are basically people who order the clothes, or makeup artists or photographers. So it's about encountering other fears as well, and escaping from a regular way of how they work and the people that are associated with them. And after a while, this is one example. I'll show you another one. This is another one. This was just a leaflet inside a magazine that was folded. They were all folded in different ways. And after a while, we started thinking about if we already have all this whole system and start creating these lookbooks and these images, why don't we also think about the way that this imagery, which is created from each show, to re-enter into the collections. So for example, another thing to understand is that most of their models are friends, so they always repeat. It's been the same faces for the last 15 years now. And why don't we use this imagery and make it a circle that this imagery also re-enters into the collection. So we started creating textile designs. So what you see here, the one with the stripes, for example, I've made it from the lookbook that was from the season before. So it's kind of interesting for me as a designer as well, because it's a continuation also of this dialogue and this collaboration that we've been going on. So it re-enters then again the graphics that was created for the lookbooks and magazines into the own collection of them. So what you see there in between, that's the images from another défilé. A more recent one, which was in a magazine called Monoculture, where for the show we asked people from art schools to come and basically make a live drawing class. So they were just drawing all the models, and then we made a lookbook from all those drawings. And we already made another pattern. So for example, this is the pattern again from the collection before. For me, it's been very nice, this collaboration, how it has been grown, because it's also interesting to suddenly see how this work starts being worn on a body and how it acts within space and how you basically have these things suddenly someone wearing it on their body. It's a very different relationship than just in making books. I would briefly like to show, or basically like to hear the beginning of an audio piece by a very young artist called Tris Michel, who does performances only. So it's an artist that has very little relics of his work, and he asked me to work on a book with him, which was basically to document the work he's done. He had only done 4 pieces so far, and I briefly just let it run for 5 minutes so you understand a bit how his work is. He sits in front of an audience, asks them how long time do you want me to perform, and then the audience says 2 minutes or 3 minutes, and then he winds up an egg timer and he performs the piece that you are going to hear now.
Also, most of the things that I have now that were once props somehow are not even relics, but they actually cease to work. So it does say 10 minutes, I hope it will be 10 minutes, but perhaps it won't even ring. 50% of the time it doesn't ring, I'm not too sure. But the story, as always, it always starts in the same place, and I actually regret that. It starts in the Lake District, in Ambleside, in Cruzvillegas, Ambleside, Lake District, Northern England, and then again, I have 5 or 6 sheets of paper. I have no idea, it keeps on changing. Left or right, Lake District, trees, a museum, a pencil museum, a museum for pencils, for lines, for shapes, concepts. Wow, why is there a museum of pencils in the middle of nowhere? And then Cruzvillegas, a house, a little house, a dormitory. An old lady comes out and says, "Cup of tea, love." And the story starts every single time in 2005. I don't want it to, but it always does. I walk in, the wooden little hut, landscape, portraiture, collages, Merzbau collages, and there it is. A little room, books, obsessions and collages in Cruzvillegas, in Ambleside, in the Lake District, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of England. Trees, landscape, Victoria, Chinese restaurant, and tables, checker tables, and Haegue Yang, or glasses of wine, water, chopsticks, knives and forks. Table conversation, and said to my dad, "Of all the places, why did you decide to have a family here?" And he says to me, "Tris, the man you need to ask is Henri Chopin." I said, "Who?" He said, "Henri Chopin." I said, "Who's that?" He says, "That's the man you need to find out. You need to ask me to find him. But you can only search. You cannot find him. If you meet him, faux pas, game over. If you search, bon voyage. If you bump into him, c'est une par chance."
Anyway, you get an idea. It's a piece called Finding Henry Chopin, which he sets out basically to look for Chopin, who was a concrete poet. And he's very been inspired, of course, by concrete poetry. Also the way he performs his pieces, he also chops up quite a lot of sentences, and that makes very surreal combinations of places and locations. And when we started working together, the main thing we started doing is to think about how to document such a performance work in the format of a book. And we ended up doing an exhibition together in a museum in Germany, in Lüneburg. And we used the money, the budget that was available, in order to buy a printing machine on eBay. And with the budget, we rented a printer to be in the space, in the exhibition space, for basically 2 months, every day. So we started transcribing all his performances and translating them also into printed text. So it was basically for us a tryout to start printing the transcriptions of the performances in different ways, in formats, and see how it works and how you could play with sentences and speed of reading and speed of gaps and speed of breathing and with type and some of photography also with uses. So during the exhibition, these leaflets were entering into the exhibition space, and people could basically take them with them. This is, for example, one example of a subscription, of a transcription. This is another one. Another piece that where he uses always the same sheet, and after each performance he throws it on the floor, so most of the sheets, they start having beer or coffee on it or tea and being partly destroyed. So we decided also to scan them and republish them for the book. And in the end, what we ended up doing is we collected all these sheets in the storage space after the exhibition, and then we started working on the actual book. And the book is this one, which is basically has one story running through, linking 4 pieces of work, and then inside the book the text jump also back and forth between the inserts and what's actually on the page. And because most of his performance works, they're never the same. They always alternate, they always change from time and place that he performs it. They're never exactly as they are. So even the language changes and the speed of them changes in the story. So in the end, what we did is we made 2 books. That's the transcription of the performance that you were just listening to. I would go a bit faster with it. So then in the end there was a documentation of the printing machine in space. So these are the 2 books. And then that's the same one again, but it has slightly different content. So for example, there we reprinted one image on top of a text that was on the page. And here on this page, just the image on the left changed. And what's interesting also with a lot of the artists that I've worked with, and that through this collaborating sense and dialogue that establishes many times, it grows. And some of them I already make several books now with, and even with Tris, like this work that we did, it entered into his own work. So now when he shows some of his pieces, he uses like the printing sheets, and he makes new works with it in combination with his performances or in combination with installations. And I actually very much enjoy that because it's an extension of this kind of dialogue that we've been having. So I'll just show very quickly, this is a collaboration with an artist called Nora Schultz. It's also, we've had these collaborations now for several years. She's just shown it in the Porticus in Frankfurt. It's basically an analog printing machine, which just consists of 2 steel rods, and you can basically press anything through. So it's the opposite of precise printing. And so each time it's shown, we bring new objects and new things, and we basically make these huge sheets of paper with prints. So one of them is like 5 meters long. This was an installation at Isabella Bortolozzi Gallery in Berlin. This was another experiment that we made with very big textiles to see what happens again with the machine. So, and with a lot of these things, it started happening that I was getting more involved also into exhibition design and how you deal also with books within a physical space. So like how not only how the narrative focuses on the content, but how do you display an archive, how do you display a library. So I started, I've done several projects in the past years now, which are basically dealing more with books or archives within a space. This is one example. It's the redesign of the Goethe Institute in New York that I made in collaboration with IFAO. And what we did is we made pieces of wallpaper, which are basically, they have 5 locations in New York. And all of these locations are different programming. One is like a curatorial residency program, another one is more based for lectures, another one is in more exhibition space. And this is the office spaces. So we started making these kind of wallpapers. This one is just taken from the inside, but you go 3 steps inside the door and you're already inside. So this is like what's then outside of the offices. So that's the same image actually. So that's what's inside when you enter the reception. Then this is on the back door of the entrance. You have the old building where the Goethe Institute used to be. And then this is Ludlow 38. It's a curatorial residency. It's this very small space here, but it's with a wallpaper between the guy who does the finances and the director. The idea was to basically, because we started doing workshops in the Goethe Institute, and it was interesting to find out how as an institution it actually functions and what's actually going on there. So we started realizing that a lot of people, there's no overlap and almost no crossing. So some of the locations, they are 2 blocks away from the offices, but the person of the language department never been there, you know. So we were like, okay, if you're all working together on this, why don't we try and make an open spaces? They could also be open office working spaces, and you could go and suddenly work down at Ludlow, or you could go and work at one of the exhibition spaces that they had. So in the office spaces, then I had this reflection of everything that they're working on and doing the programming for. The library itself in the Goethe Institute in New York is quite, I mean, it's basically just very little books, but it's all German original. So most people who go there just want to find an original copy in German or a translation from a German author. So the librarian was kind of dry and was not very so I was heavily thinking about how to reactivate her library, you know, and how to create basically a sort of thing that they can have kind of a playful situation again. So we made this thing which was a book arm, which she could use as a tool to start playing, to highlight different books that she likes from the library or that she wants people to see while they visit the library. That was the first prototype. And these are new versions which we made, and one is an extension of the library, so if the bookshelf is full, she could extend it outwards. And this is another one which has a kind of, you can use it as a coat hanger. This is one example of a furniture piece which grew out of a lot of these kind of ideas, which is basically I call it cake table, but it's a furniture piece where you can display books and use it for an archive. So here you can see it in different exhibitions or libraries. So the bottom part is basically a stool you can sit on, and you can also turn it upside down in order to create a shelf or a display situation. Then last summer I worked on a project for the whole summer with an institution called Kunstverein Munich. It was called Group Affinity. It was basically a summer school where 9 faculties were invited to spend 2 weeks in Munich with students. And the people who applied were very international. They could go to Munich, stay there, and they were provided accommodation and food and take part of the summer school. And all of the faculties, they had various, well, they were all related to basically group praxis or working with other people or working in groups with different fields, for example, performance, music, or design, or architecture. So we made all the design for them as well. This was the timetable. So in the end, we asked the curators themselves to draw the timetable on the wall. And then people could start adding things or subtracting things or crossing out. If something would happen suddenly during the week in the park, then they would write it on and come to the park at 5 o'clock. And I was asked to do also all the kind of furniture or architectural intervention, because in the Kunstverein it's nothing, it's super empty. It's a museum space, so it's very wide, lots of echo. And I created these benches for it. which were basically made from all the leftover materials of the shows that just went down in Munich the month before. So there was a big retrospective on Japanese fashion. So you can still see the label of the fashion designers. So these were used as the walls in the show, and I asked them to ship them all there, and then we constructed all the furniture. So this was the fashion show in the Haus der Kunst. There you can see also the labels. So the idea with the furniture was that it's kind of very, actually, so almost brutal and kind of confronting furniture, so that all the people who were taking part in the summer school, they had to react to it. They had to occupy the space and be actively involved in making it comfortable or using it. And this is a table that I constructed for it that was inspired by Lina Bobardi's architecture for Cesc Pompeia, but I made it in 4 pieces, so it was sliced with different constellations. And of course, as soon as the summer school started, everyone started occupying the space, and it started really changing. Film groups started putting carpets inside. Performance groups started doing things with cloth and material, moving around the walls. This was a lecture by Aya Arakawa. Yeah, and also what I did for the summer school is I shifted the offices where they usually are. And I put also, they had food for 2 weeks for free, so I put the kitchen in the entrance space of the museum. So you basically enter through the kitchen, because it was the social space where people could meet and basically spend time and talk to each other. So there was every day a cook cooking for everyone, and it was, yeah. And the office spaces of the director, we took them out of the normal office space, and it was transformed into a band practice room, so where the band could play, which was part of the summer school. So it was all made with carpet, and it was soundproof. And then I asked the directors to work in the museum space publicly. So I constructed a very large version of this table. And the director was working there every day for those 2 weeks, and all the staff, and everyone would also go there and check their emails and talk to them. And there were concerts in the evenings. This is one group that works basically with all the participants come in, and they still tell their story about who they are and their background, and their aim was at the end of the 2 weeks to write one song together and to perform it at the end of the exhibition. As you can see, it got more and more chaotic, but I like this a lot. And this is the last project I would like to show. It's actually opened last week, and I've been working on this for the last 3 months. It's the art fair in Berlin, Art Berlin Contemporary. They asked me to do all the set design or all the architecture in a way. And I usually never go to art fairs because I really dislike them. But in this case, I said, okay, if you're really, because what happened is last year they asked me already for a proposal for this, and I said, okay, if I work on this, I would really start like to thinking, how could you deal with that and design and make a structure for an art fair that deals also with kind of recycling issues and also with not making domestic things that are just thrown to the bin after 3 days. Because usually when you go to an art fair, there's afterwards 20 containers full with wood and it all gets burned, and the next thing comes. Then comes the fair for toys or whatever, or for cars. So I said, okay, if I would like to do that, it would be interesting to think about sustainability and how could we make a proposal or a step within the art world to think about a display system for this fair with using existing structures. So what I did is 60% of it was built with scaffolding. So these were rented and then given back again to the company. and the other parts was all left very open. So they were very basic structured walls that were made. And usually what happens in display or fair architecture is that everything is hidden. So especially in art fairs, you have white walls and everyone hides the corners and hides what's behind, the cables, the nails, everything is hidden. So it has to look as slick as possible, and the team is usually busy with hiding what's there. So, but I designed a modular system then for the galleries, which was based on 8 different modular structures that each gallerist could choose, and with these elements they could bind their own booth and build their own display. So this, for example, it's one booth made with scaffolding, and on the inside it's covered with the walls. This is another booth. Everything was visible, so the weights were visible, the wooden structures of how it was built. So for example, on this side you have one gallery, on the other side you have another gallery. This is one painter who decided just to put 2 scaffoldings to display his paintings like that. And what was interesting, it started making these really like nice perspectives, which made you want to continue walking and go to the next thing that you saw suddenly through the gaps of the structure. Or this was one gallery which just rented fences. It was another modular system, part of that modular system. For example, it's a small gallery, they just had one fence and she was sitting in front. But the format of this fair is not so much like it's an already established fair. It has for many years been more claiming to be an exhibition. So they're really like in a between form, with a little bit of wanting to be a fair and wanting to be still experimental and claiming to be at the same time to be an exhibition. So they're kind of in a between phase at the moment. It just closed on Sunday. It was 7,000 square meters. So this is one booth by Manfred Bernice, for example. He just took 3 fences and then put his work inside. Also, I made all the signage system. It was just wooden boards based on the floor, just lying on the floor like this. That then the artist could place in relation to where they wanted to put it, or closer to the work, or further away, or closer to the wall. And we made also one section which was created by Artist Space. It was a kind of bazaar, which were basically different types of shops and designers and publishers. This was actually the second entrance space into the whole fair. So the idea was to have it much more chaotic and really have the feeling of a bazaar. And for that I only used these kind of pallets, regular shipping pallets. It would then afterwards be returned back to the pallet companies. Yeah. I'm very happy if you, I mean that's kind of it what I wanted to show, so you get more an overview of how what I've been doing has grown and changed also in the last years, and what form also, let's say the bookmaking started taking into relation of doing more now also spatial projects, but they are very much still rooted about how you think about structure or how you think about narrative and how you tell a story and how this story is documented. How is it articulated? Is it through typography or is it through a scaffolding? It's very similar in an art fair because I was all the time thinking about this art fair, like I'm doing a group show catalog where 98% of the artists or art I totally hate. I'm not interested in it. So how do you make a structure that kind of works like this? And big group show catalogs are many times like this. So if you have any questions, or I'm very happy to be around and answer. I'm also happy to open it up to discussion if you want.
Yes.
I'm interested in the shift in your practice? I think I'm just curious as a graphic designer. I mean, have you always been interested in artistic kind of critical practice, or do you experience shift of like, you know, having gone to like graphic design training, conventional, and then encountering the artists that you collaborate with, or yeah, just what made the change to like even dealing with space?
Yes.
What brought it up?
Well, how I first started, to be honest, when I started studying design, I didn't really know actually what it was. It was just at this time when I signed up for the course, I was quite naive. I mean, I just signed up because it seemed more free to me at the time than painting or sculpture. So I signed up for the design course, but I didn't know, I was not so aware about typography and graphic design and such. And what I still believe now, and what I think I've been busy for myself doing the last 10 years, is more trying to define my own praxis, you know, so not that I have to fit like a profession or the praxis. I want to kind of do what, or define what I do myself and make it suit me, not myself suit it. So this was the same with, like, in the beginning I just started working with friends which were around me. Most of them were musicians and artists, and so I started making invitations for them and then started slowly drawing.
So it's a very natural affiliation and understanding of what they're trying to communicate, that it's not necessarily conventionally like how graphic designers would communicate. So,
but I studied graphic design in the London College of Printing, and then afterwards in the Jan van Eyck Academy, art theory.
So do you think that could have been the shift? I guess a lot of them, just observing a lot of the graphic design practice that are practicing like you, have that sort of background at least, kind of like art theory background, or else they'd just be serving the market like purely, just make things accessible and sellable and branded. And that's it.
Of course, the Jan van Eyck had a very crucial part in defining this, because when I left London, I was really fed up. I did not want to basically work in design. I was clear that I didn't want to do it. And when I arrived at Jan van Eyck, it started having a ground again where I could think about it and experiment and do things that I wanted to do, which didn't matter if you would call it theory or design or art. It was just a place at that time, that, I mean, it was 11 years ago, which gave me the basis to do that.
There are other questions?
What do you look for when you're choosing your projects? I mean, I would imagine a lot of opportunities offered to you. But I mean, how did you kind of come about doing something so different, like the art fair? And in general, how do you select your projects?
Well, at the very beginning, 10 years ago, more or less, I had 2 or 3 books that I was working on, and I started with 1 or 2. And I did them, and then immediately came new artists suddenly asking me to work on a book. And in the beginning, of course, it was not so frequent, but then suddenly, of course, I was already involved in the art world, and I was very interested also in seeing work. And then suddenly the artist came to me that I saw the work or was already interested in. And that was kind of surprising, because it kind of showed me that even there's an indirect connection, even though I might have not known them before, but then suddenly they call me the week later, but I just saw the week before. It's like a lot of things like this happen, and it's still happening now, and that's what I enjoy the most, because in the end, the work is seen, or the books are seen. It's a distributed medium that, you know, you can find in bookshops, and it still is now more the case that an artist comes directly to me and asks me to work with them, or a curator, rather than a publisher or a company. I mean, I never get asked these kind of projects, actually. And this kind of project happened a lot more because they saw group affinity, and they saw some of the furniture that I made. And they know that they knew, of course, that I had an experience of very closely collaborating with different artists and curators. So in the last years, they were very unhappy actually with the display. So it was always, let's say, too imposing on different artworks, or trying to give, let's say, maybe too much architecture.
I'm just curious, how did the galleries react
To this?
to the structures? I mean, do they?
Most of them really liked it, they really enjoyed it, because the whole space, the whole song playing. I mean, most of them reacted very well, because through how you see it there, it created like really like an open space, you know, and so it was actually really nice to see that, you know, people then, you look through it and they start walking around and they start sitting next to each other, so it created much more of a, yeah, kind of, it's a kind of in-between atmosphere of what an art fair is and what an exhibition is. It's neither of those two actually.
And some were angry.
The most ones which were, there were some which were angry, but they were more not angry about the architecture, they were more angry that their name was not big enough, or that they wanted a sponsor, you know, or that they paid a lot of money and that they need more space, you know, so like the typical gallery construction. And this is something I had nothing to do in the end with me, because most of them knew what they were choosing. Like they had a choice of 8, 9 modular structures and they could choose. So in the end, it was also much more about how the gallerist had already communicated these structures. Like this one, for example, is a painter, and he just did it with fences, and all the paintings were made by using the fence.
That it's what in any like design project, but it's astonishing when you see the documentation, which is, let's say, still shots, is that definitely what design changes is the sociability of people, no? Like at the end it does change behavior in space and relationships among individuals.
Yes.
I think as curators, when you make an exhibition, you would tend to bring another format that the exhibition is experienced differently from, say, the canonical white cubes. No?
Yes, of course.
And I was wondering, like, you did the documentation that you just showed us, because it seems that it's really part afterwards of kind of like there's a gaze towards what should be documented, right?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it was me who took the pictures, so it's very much looking at how the structure is. I didn't document the artworks as such. But I mean, and I know what you mean. I even have like one version of this presentation, which I should have specifically do much more in Latin America, and to you, Inti, would have been very specifically interesting, because it's more about basically show the burned archive of Oiticica, and talk a little bit about the relation also this in relation to the work that, for example, Mariana did, and how different art gets justified within different cultural contexts through documentation and through history. This is what the images you see here is a very known Latin American artist called Oiticica that became more famous abroad in the last 6 or 8 years. And this is the family home where a lot of the works were stored, and a lot of the works were actually burned. And it's a very important Latin American artist that is not in collections in Latin America, or very few collections in Latin America. But luckily enough, there exist 2 books which were before documented about most of his texts and most of his work. And this justification of history also, and of the importance of the praxis of certain artists, of course, it very much relates to archives, or like the archive that you have here, even, and what that kind of filters through, and what exists there, and what's going to stay there, even maybe in 20 years, and how this archive deals with it, and how it's documented. So all these questions, they're very much embedded in the books that I've shown you, and how you deal with it. How do you deal with documenting language? How do you deal with documenting performance? Of course, now it's changed also with internet, but still, there are certain issues which it's very important for good archival work to be done and kind of to document works. I mean, it's more like another discussion, but it goes a little bit into this direction that you. So this is actually the book that you see there from Witte de Witt, the Oiticica books that are stored in the Witte de Witt catalog.
There's one I was surprised to see in the public library here in Hong Kong. They have that book. They're like 20 books on Latin American art, and one of them is the Witte de Witt, which is
Can you say anything about your kind of working practice with your clients or collaborators, and has it changed over time, or is it been pretty consistent from the time you started doing your first books to the time now when you're doing things more spatially?
It's always different. There's no set rule. It's even like, especially with some books I start working on, it takes ages to do it. Sometimes it's done very fast. There's no set rule. There's no set. I have no set. In that sense, my company is very unprofessional. It's really like.
Why do you say that?
Because we're not very organized. It's much more flexible in that sense. And like, there's certain planning, but there's no set way of working. So it's really.
How many people are there in your company?
It's me, and then I have 2 assistants.
And so it changes the way that you're working every time, or?
Yeah. So sometimes now the person is there is just doing a catalog which has to be finished in 2 days on the invite, but before the other person is doing it a month ago, so it's always like very kind of chaotic, but also at the same time this is kind of what I enjoy, because it leaves open possibilities. And it leaves also a lot of openness for chance or accidents in a way, which kind of can even come out of this chaos.
What kind of instruments do you use when you're graphing or developing these structures? Because often if you use certain tools, or like Adobe, it might be limiting. I don't know if you sit there and you actually cut up things.
Well, I mean, of course, most books are made in InDesign, but I don't really care about I'm not so interested in computer in that sense. I mean, of course, I'm interested, but it's just a tool.
So you actually sit there with material, like documents?
It varies. It's totally different. Like for example, like the performance artist Cruzvillegas Michel, we mainly talk. It's we mainly discuss, and then like he tells me like, I have this font always. It's the last one on the list. It's called Verdana. That's a nice one. But it relates to him. He's been using it the last 10 years for printing out his text pieces for performances. And once you figure out something like this, it's very nice. I don't think it's a particularly nice typeface or well done. It was made for the screen, but still it kind of relates to what he does. And he's used to reading text like this, so why not use that for a book? So it's more like that. It's about dialogue in that sense. And of course, before it goes to print, we have to lay it out in InDesign and send a PDF. And of course, but it's not the main thing. Did it answer the question?
Sure.
there are no more questions, I'm gonna be around if you want to have some water together or Coca-Cola.
You take that picture?
Yes.
It's so depressing.
Yeah.
Where do you go? Where do you go?
Oh, okay, this is about to go. But next week we're here, right?
No, I mean, yeah. You want really
It really varies, right?
The same
I know. I would ask what you should do.
They vary.